My father was born in China. My mother was born in Cuba. And I was born in the good old US of A. When I was growing up, American families like ours shared a common tradition. We sat down and ate a meal together on Sunday. It was called Sunday dinner. Perhaps you remember it. My mother always made something special. Roast beef, roast pork, or roast chicken. But my favorite dish that she would make was spaghetti and meatballs. Now in those days, my mother didn't just go to the store, get a jar of ragu off the shelf, dump it into a pot, and serve it up 20 minutes later. She made her sauce from scratch. She chopped up garlic and onions, sauteed them in olive oil. She'd add a big can of whole tomatoes, tomato paste, chop them up and stir them in the pan. She'd season it with salt, oregano, a little bit of sugar. And then she'd add a special ingredient, so secret that even today I can't tell you what it is. She'd put this into a food mill and then grind it up so that the juices dripped into the pan and flavor that sauce till it was just right. She made her own meatballs too. She'd grind up the meat, knead it with egg and seasoned breadcrumbs. And when I was old enough, I helped make them. And we didn't make puny little meatballs, we made big meatballs. My mother would fry them, add them to the sauce, cover the pan, and let the whole thing simmer for about 2 hours. My mother makes the best spaghetti and meatballs in the whole world. At some point while this was cooking, my father would wander into the kitchen, lured by the heavenly aroma. What's cooking, Mommy? Spaghetti and meatballs, Daddy. Would you like some? My father would get this strange look on his face. Oh, that's okay, Mommy. No. Then my mother boiled a pot of rice for my father with a link of lupchung, Chinese sausage, to flavor it. We'd sit down. My mother and I would eat spaghetti and meatballs. My father would eat his rice and lupchung. Now, why my father didn't like spaghetti and meatballs, I don't know. He never said. But I think the sight of those huge meatballs swimming in that sea of red sauce just looked too foreign to him. But whenever my mother made this dish, she would always invite my father to join us, and he would always say no. For as long as I can remember, from the time I was about 5 years old, through elementary school, intermediate school, right into high school. I remember one time when I was about 15, we were just about to sit down to Sunday dinner when my mother started to ask my father the usual question. What are you asking him for? You know what he's going to say. My mother looked at me and glared me into silence. And then she turned back to my father. Would you like some, Daddy? No, Mommy. That's okay. In my junior year of college, I left home to spend a year abroad. It was a wonderful year, but I missed my mother's cooking. And when I returned, she wanted to make a special meal to welcome me home. Bobby, what would you like for dinner on Sunday? Mommy, could we have spaghetti and meatballs? Sure. And soon the whole house was filled with the wonderful smells of my mother's cooking. Just as we started to sit down to eat, my mother turned to my father. Daddy, we're having spaghetti and meatballs. Would you like some? I couldn't believe my ears. Nothing had changed in the year that I'd been gone. They were still going at it. I'd completely forgotten about this and was totally flabbergasted. Here we were, 15 years later, and my mother was still asking my father the same question. Well, in the middle of this internal tirade, I suddenly realized that I'd heard my mother ask my father the question, but I hadn't heard him say anything. Well, I turned to look at my father. My mother was looking at him too. He was just sitting there like he was thinking. And then he said, Okay, Mommy, I'll try a little. My mother's eyebrows shot up about as far as my jaw dropped. She got up from the table. I could tell she was very excited. But she forced herself to walk calmly over to the kitchen, which was right next to the dining area. She didn't want to rile my father. He might change his mind. She prepared a plate for him. She put spaghetti on the plate. She started to add some sauce. Well, my father could see everything that she was doing. "No, Mommy, not too much." He only let her give him 2 tablespoons of sauce, which everybody knows is not enough. She started to put a meatball on top. "No, Mommy, too big." He only let her give him half a meatball. She served us, and we started to eat. Now, my mother and I tried to act as if everything was normal. We didn't want to make my father feel self-conscious. But as we ate and talked, we glanced over at my father. He seemed to be eating, but he didn't say anything. When next we looked, his plate was completely clean. He'd eaten the whole thing. "How was that, Daddy? Would you like some more?" "Okay, Mommy." My mother floated from the table over to the kitchen. She prepared a second helping for my father. She put spaghetti on the plate. She added some sauce, just 2 tablespoons. She started to put a meatball on top. She glanced back at my father. He was watching her, but he didn't say anything. He let her give him a whole meatball. She came back in and set it down before him. "How's that, Daddy?" My father looked down at the plate in front of him, and then he looked up at my mother and said, "Mommy, could I have some more sauce?" Like I told you, my mother makes the best spaghetti and meatballs in the whole world. If you don't believe me, ask my father.